The alarm tore through the corridor before I even understood what I was looking at. My name is Vexthara Olkeen, and I have spent 11 cycles training recruits from every corner of the Coalition. I have seen panic. I have seen fear. I have seen recruits freeze so completely that their bodies forget how to breathe. But nothing prepared me for the 7 seconds that followed the malfunction in Sector 9. I was standing behind the reinforced glass of the observation deck, watching 2 trainees move through the ambush corridor. A live simulation designed to test reflexes under pressure. The rounds fired in that corridor are supposed to be dampened. Painful, yes. Enough to leave a bruise that lasts a week, but never enough to truly hurt anyone. The turret was not supposed to fire at full strength. It did anyway. Daniel Marsh, a human trainee from a quiet farming town he once described to me as flat and endless and green, rounded the corner at the exact moment the targeting system failed to throttle down. The shot caught him in the side. He dropped instantly, and the sound that came out of him was not a scream. It was worse. It was silence, followed by a wet, sharp gasp, the kind that makes every instructor in the room go still. His partner was a young Vantic recruit named Eth Solvarn. She had been training with him for 4 months. I remember approving their pairing myself, thinking a quick, agile Vantic and a steady, patient human might balance each other well in the field. I did not expect to learn just how far that balance could be pushed. The moment Daniel fell, every protocol in my mind activated at once. Trainees are required to retreat to the extraction point the instant a live casualty occurs. Medical response teams are stationed exactly 90 seconds away, a number chosen because it balances speed with safety, because sending untrained recruits into a chaotic scene often causes more harm than good. 90 seconds is supposed to be fast. It is not fast enough when someone is bleeding out on the floor in front of you. I watched Eth freeze for exactly 1 second. Her eyes moved from Daniel to the corridor exit, then back to Daniel again. I have reviewed that single second more times than I can count since then, trying to understand what passed through her mind. Training, instinct, something else entirely. Then she moved. She did not run for the exit the way protocol demanded. She did not wait for backup. She dropped to her knees beside Daniel, wrapped her arms under his shoulders and began to pull. I need to explain something about Vantic physiology, because it matters here more than anything else. Vantic recruits are fast, faster than almost any other species in the Coalition. Their reflexes are extraordinary, their agility unmatched, but their strength is limited. Their bones are lighter than a human's, built for speed rather than power. A grown Vantic struggles to lift even another Vantic of similar size. Daniel Marsh was not a similar size. He was built like the farmland he came from, broad and solid, easily 3 times heavier relative to Eth's frame than anything her body was designed to carry. She dragged him anyway. I watched through the glass as her boots slid against the corridor floor, slick now with blood that had spread faster than I wanted to admit was possible. Her whole body shook with the effort. I could see it even from a distance, the strain in her shoulders, the way her legs buckled and recovered. Every biometric reading on the wall display beside me turned red as her muscles were pushed far past any safe limit. She screamed something in her own language as she pulled him, a phrase that translates roughly to stay, 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 repeated over and over like a chant she was using to hold herself together as much as to hold him. 40 meters. That was the distance between where Daniel fell and the safety of the outer blast door. 40 meters of corridor, much of it slick with blood, all of it covered under the weight of a man who outweighed her by a wide margin. She crossed it in 23 seconds. I know the exact number because every second in that corridor is logged and timed for safety review. 23 seconds from the moment she began pulling him to the moment the blast door opened and she stumbled through it, covered head to boots in his blood, her arms locked around his chest, refusing to let go even as her legs finally gave out beneath her. I have never moved so fast in my life as I did crossing that observation deck to reach them. Medical response arrived within moments after that, exactly on schedule, exactly 90 seconds after the initial alarm. But by then Daniel Marsh had already been moved to where trained hands could reach him nearly a minute earlier than protocol would have allowed. The surgeons later told me, in the flat and careful way medical staff speak when they do not want to overstate anything, that those extra 60 seconds may have been the difference between a recovery and a loss. Eth did not walk away from that corridor unharmed. 4 separate muscle groups in her arms and legs had torn under the strain of carrying something never meant for her frame to carry. She would need weeks of regenerative therapy. When I visited her afterward, she was lying in a medical bay 2 beds away from Daniel, refusing to let anyone clean the blood from her uniform until she had confirmed with her own eyes that he was breathing steadily on his own. I asked her the question that had been sitting in my chest since the moment I saw her make that decision. "Why did you not wait?" I asked. "Why did you not follow protocol and let the response team handle it?" She looked at me the way someone looks at a question so obvious it barely deserves an answer. "He is my partner," she said. "You do not leave your partner on the floor while you go ask permission to help him." I had no response to that. 11 cycles of training theory. And I had no response. It would have been easy to end the story there. A moment of unexpected courage during a training accident, filed away as an example for future recruits. But what happened over the following weeks taught me something I had not expected to learn at this stage of my career. Daniel Marsh woke 2 days later. The first thing he did, before he even asked about his own condition, was ask whether Iyeth was safe. When the nurse told him she was resting 2 beds away with torn muscles from carrying him, he laughed, a weak and broken sound that turned quickly into a wince of pain, and said that sounded exactly like something she would do. When he was finally strong enough to be wheeled over to see her, she was awake, glaring at the ceiling with the particular frustration of someone who has been ordered to stay still for far longer than she wants to. "You are an idiot," she told him immediately. "Yeah," he said. "Thanks for coming to get me anyway." I stood at the doorway of that medical bay longer than I should have, watching the two of them talk quietly, watching the easy way they teased each other despite what had just happened. It struck me then that this was not an isolated moment of bravery. This was something that had been building for months, something I had watched grow between them during their training without fully understanding what it was. Over the following weeks, as both recruits recovered, I found myself returning to that corridor footage again and again, trying to understand the moment Iyeth made her decision. I began asking other instructors quietly whether they had seen similar behavior among human trainees paired with recruits from other species. The answers surprised me. An instructor from the engineering wing told me about a human trainee who had once climbed into a collapsing support structure to pull out 2 coalition engineers, despite every automated safety system screaming at him to stay clear. He had no equipment rated for that kind of rescue. He went in anyway, using nothing but his bare hands and a length of cable, and pulled both engineers free before the structure gave way completely. A pilot instructor described a human recruit who had once given up his own oxygen supply during a training exercise gone wrong, choosing to share limited air with a partner who was struggling, rather than protect his own safety margin, calculating correctly but barely that they could both survive if they shared, rather than one surviving with certainty while the other did not. None of these stories were in any official record. They were simply things that instructors remembered, small moments tucked away because they did not fit neatly into any lesson plan. Moments that seemed less like tactical decisions and more like something instinctive, something built into how humans seemed to approach the people around them. I began to wonder whether this was something that could be taught, or whether it was something that could only be caught, passed from one person to another simply by standing close enough to witness it. I decided to speak with Daniel directly once he was strong enough for a longer conversation. I found him sitting up in his medical bed, color slowly returning to his face, reading something on a small handheld device. I asked him plainly, "Did you expect Iyeth to do what she did?" He set the device down and thought about the question longer than I expected. "No," he said. "Not exactly, but I would have done the same for her without thinking twice, so I suppose I always hoped she felt the same way." I asked him where that instinct came from, whether it was something taught in human training academies before they ever reached the coalition. He shook his head. "It is not something you learn in a classroom," he said. "It is something you learn from the people around you. My grandfather used to say that you do not measure a person by how they act when things are easy. You measure them by what they do the moment things go wrong, when there is no time to think it through, when there is only time to act." I asked whether he believed that instinct was unique to humans. He laughed at that. A real laugh this time, not the broken one from before. "No," he said, "I do not think it is unique to us at all. I think Iyeth already had it in her. Maybe she just needed a reason to let it out." That answer stayed with me longer than I expected it to. Weeks passed, and both recruits returned to active training, though instructors kept a careful eye on their recovery progress. Iyeth's muscles healed slowly, the regenerative therapy doing its work but leaving her frustrated at how much slower she moved compared to before. Daniel carried a long scar along his side, a permanent reminder of the malfunction that nearly ended his training career entirely. Neither of them spoke about the incident often. When they did, it was usually with the same easy humor they used with each other about everything else, a way of processing something serious without letting it consume them. The coalition conducted a full investigation into the malfunction that caused the incident. The targeting system responsible for throttling live-fire rounds down to training levels had suffered a rare calibration failure, one that had never occurred in the history of the Academy, and one that engineers worked quickly to ensure could never happen again. Safety protocols were reviewed and strengthened, new redundancy systems were installed, the corridor itself was closed for a full cycle while every piece of equipment was tested and retested. But no amount of engineering could explain what Iyeth had done in those 23 seconds. That part of the story belonged entirely to her. I requested, and was granted, permission to include the incident in the Academy's training curriculum, not as a lesson in following protocol, but as a case study in what happens when someone chooses connection over procedure during a crisis. I worried at first that presenting it this way might be seen as encouraging recruits to abandon safety protocols whenever they felt strongly enough about a situation. But the review board, after watching the footage themselves, agreed that some lessons cannot be taught through rules alone. During the presentation to a new class of recruits several months later, I played the footage of those 23 seconds in full. I watched the faces of recruits from a dozen different species as they saw Iyeth make her decision, saw her drag a man 3 times her recommended lifting capacity across 40 meters of corridor, rather than lose even a single second waiting for help to arrive. A young recruit from a species known for careful, methodical decision-making raised a hand afterward and asked why the Academy would present behavior that so clearly violated safety protocol as an example worth studying. I told her the truth. I said, we are not asking you to abandon protocol whenever you feel a strong emotion. Protocol exists because it saves lives in the vast majority of situations, and instructors will always teach you to follow it carefully. But we want you to understand that there may come a moment in your career when the person beside you needs something protocol cannot provide quickly enough, and in that moment, you will have to decide what kind of partner you want to be. I do not know if my answer satisfied her. I am not certain there is an answer that fully satisfies a question like that. Daniel and Iyeth graduated from the Academy together several months later, both of them fully recovered, both of them assigned to the same operational unit at their own request. I attended their graduation ceremony, watching them stand side by side as their names were called, watching the easy way they still teased each other, the particular kind of comfort that only comes from having trusted someone with your life, and having that trust returned in full. Before they left the Academy for their new posting, Iyeth approached me privately. She thanked me for the conversations we had during her recovery, conversations I had not realized meant as much to her as they apparently did. I asked her one final question before she left. I asked whether she regretted what it cost her, the torn muscles, the weeks of painful therapy, all to save a fraction of a minute in a crisis that medical response would have reached regardless. She looked at me with the same certainty she had shown from her medical bed weeks earlier. If given the choice again, she said, I would not change a single second of it. I believed her completely. I have taught hundreds of recruits since that day, and I continue to teach hundreds more. I have refined my lessons on tactical patience, on the wisdom of trusting trained response systems, on the statistical value of following established protocol during emergencies. All of these lessons remain true and important, and I will continue teaching them for as long as I hold this position. But somewhere in every course I now teach, I include those 23 seconds. Not because they represent a formula recruits should follow, and not because I want anyone to believe that abandoning protocol is always the right choice. I include them because they represent something I have come to believe cannot be fully captured in any manual or lesson plan, something that lives instead in the choices people make for each other when there is no time left to think, only time left to act. I still do not have a tidy conclusion to offer at the end of this account. I only have what I witnessed with my own eyes on that day, a young recruit who looked at a countdown of 90 seconds and decided the math simply did not apply to her, not that day, not for him. Some lessons, I have come to understand, are not things you can teach in a classroom. Some lessons you can only catch, carried from one person to another, the way it seemed to pass from Daniel to Iyeth during 4 quiet months of training together, long before either of them understood just how much it would come to matter. I do not know if I will ever fully understand what passed between them in that corridor, but I know I will spend the rest of my career grateful that I was there to witness it, and grateful that somewhere among the countless recruits who passed through this academy, there are still people willing to run toward the ones who need them most, no matter what the countdown says.